Welcome to today's Smith in the World panel. I am Debra Immergut, Assistant Director of Career Development for Arts, Media, and Communications careers. And this is the fifth panel in the 2026 Smith in the World Conference Series. So when completed, the series will have showcase students in education, nonprofit, and social impact, health professions, business, finance, consulting, and entrepreneurship, government, law, and public policy, arts, media, and communications, and STEM. We welcome everyone joining us today, including students, prospective students, former Smith in the World presenters, faculty, staff, family and friends, supervisors, and colleagues. Thank you for joining us to hear from these outstanding students. The Smith in the World Conference celebrates students' off-campus experiential learning, including internships, community service, and research. Students reflect on how these experiences have impacted and enriched their academic and professional paths. And it is part of the college's spring showcases. To learn more about that, Emily will put a link to the page on the Smith website all about that. Our panelists today will give short presentations about their off-campus learning experiences in the area of arts, media, and communications. And I am very honored to introduce these amazing panelists. We have Olivia Petty, class of 2026, Madeline Mays, class of 2027, and Katherine Metzger, class of 2026. This session will be recorded, so we ask you to please keep your microphones muted and submit your questions for presenters using the chat tool. And after everybody has presented, we will pose the questions and have a nice Q&A session. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our first panelist, Olivia.
Hi guys. Let me make sure I'm sharing my screen. Okay, so sorry for the tab up in the corner. That's just gonna be how it doesn't want to be full screen for some reason, so my apologies. My name is Olivia Petty, and I will be presenting today on my experience breaking into the world of journalism. Um, so I'm from San Diego, California. I'm a senior, double majoring in environmental science and policy, sociology, and I'm doing a concentration in journalism, so a bit of a mouthful. And I'm also the editor-in-chief of the school paper, the Sophian. So I'm going to jump right into my trajectory. I kind of hit the ground running my first year at Smith by taking the Intro to Journalism class, which was taught by Nyla Morera, who is the co-director of the journalism concentration. And for those who don't know, concentrations are basically minors with you have to do two practical experiences in order to complete it. Um, but yeah, it was through that class that I was able to publish my first byline, which was on the front page of the Daily Hampshire Gazette, which is the local paper here in Northampton. I had no journalism experience in high school. It wasn't something that I was aware that I was interested in, but through that class, I was able to get published. And I also started writing for the Sophian. I was doing concert reviews, and I also joined the Smith radio station. So just really hit the ground running and decided that I wanted to concentrate in journalism before even declaring a major. And then during my sophomore year, I kept taking journalism classes and I ran for an editorial position on the board of the Sophian because there are a bunch of different sections that you can run for. And I started working with Nyla Morera as a student liaison for the journalism department, doing all sorts of administrative stuff. And I was applying to internships like a madman during my sophomore year because I was convinced that I really, really needed one. But I wasn't getting much traction because I didn't have a very big portfolio. Like even though I had been published, I had only been published like 3 to 4 times. Um, so I was able to secure an internship that was tangentially related to journalism through the Environmental Science and Policy Department and their partnership with NOAA. This is a partnership that's like organized and funded through Smith, and I highly recommend it to anyone who is in environmental science or biology. Like, if you can, definitely apply to this program because it's such a unique, wonderful thing that Smith has. And I did a science communications internship with them in the marine mammal and turtle division. But it was mostly internal communications, and I didn't really feel like I'd found my calling yet, even though it was a very, very cool and rewarding experience. So it was my junior year when things started to really pick up because I decided to stay at Smith instead of going abroad like a lot of juniors do. so that I could take my journalism concentration capstone a year early. Typically, it's reserved for uh, seniors, but I was able to get in as a junior. And this completely paid off as I was able to publish two pretty hefty articles in The Shoestring, which is a local nonprofit investigative newspaper that I highly recommend. And I also ran for editor-in-chief of the Sophian in my junior spring. So I was also applying to tons of internships around this time. And again, not getting much traction, not really hearing back from anyone. And I was applying like everywhere across the country. It did not matter where. I just wanted something. And it was like the beginning of May, so like very end of the year, and I hadn't really nailed anything down yet. And I was getting really discouraged. And then I got an email from an editor at the San Diego Union-Tribune asking for an interview. So I was offered an 8-week internship in the arts and entertainment department, or section, I guess, under the community guides editor, Abby Hamlin. And this was just like kind of like a serendipitous opportunity because it was a medium-sized paper, it was a paid internship, and in like a big metropolitan city. And it was also like I could live at home. So it was just like things really, really fell into place. And I'm not sure exactly what like put me over the top compared to other candidates, but I think that my writing samples that I submitted and my extracurriculars, as well as the strength of my interview, really, really played a big factor in me being able to get the role. I also think that being a local probably helps, although it's definitely not a deal breaker because some of the other interns were from like Texas. So you don't need to be a local to be an intern. But my experience at the UT was super, super exciting and rewarding. And I had all sorts of different assignments, the first of which were these roundups and guides. So, for those of you who don't know much about San Diego, the biggest event of the year by far is San Diego International Comic-Con. So, there were a million articles that we did that were all Comic-Con related, including some live reporting where we went to Comic-Con every day and we did these like on the ground interviews with people, and then we would write up the interview and send it to our editor who would publish them from the office. And it was very, very exciting, but very exhausting. And here's some photos from that. And I'm not like a Comic-Con person. I would have never gone had it not been for this assignment. So I was like totally new to everything about it. Then we did profile assignments, which are focused on like individual people and their interesting story. And I did a lot of these, and like I did ones on impressive San Diego locals, and I also did ones on celebrities who were passing through town. So one of my favorite kinds of articles to write because you really get to know the like subject. And I got to do this cool article on the guitarist for the Pixies, which was very, very cool for me. And then I did assignments that were hinged on like events. So these were mainly daily assignments where I would go to an event in the morning and then I would have an article draft due by like 2 p.m. that day. So super, super fast, very highly like pressurized, but I thought it was good pressure because it forces you to just like cut to the chase immediately. Um, and I got to go to some really cool events, including the highly popular horse races that happen every summer, which again, I never would have gone to had it not been an assignment. And I actually ended up going back because after my first article on the like opening day, I was like basically given the opportunity to go back and track down a celebrity who had made a like surprise appearance there. You guys might know him as a rapper, but I know him as the racehorse owner, Lil Yachty. He is a very nice guy. Yeah, very, very bizarre experience. Um, and then, as is the nature of journalism, I also had all sorts of random miscellaneous assignments, especially ones that were based on like the interests that I had told my editor about early on. So I did a concert review of Shakira, I did some more science-based articles, and I also got to shadow a lot of reporters who worked there, like the education reporter, who's actually a Smithy, um, the county government reporter and the homelessness reporter, and I got to like contribute to their big articles. So that was really cool. And then towards the end of the internship, we also got to do some of our own pitching. And pitching is going to be a really big part of any journalism internship, the ability to like come up with your own story. And thankfully, I got the green light on one of my pitches, which was basically an investigation into the fading like movie theater industry in San Diego, because there are only three historic movie theaters that remain in the entire county, and somehow they're still alive. So I wanted to figure out how they were doing that. And it was a really, really, really wonderful experience. It was definitely my like magnum opus of the internship, and it felt like a wonderful payoff because I was using all of the skills that I had been building over the summer, and kind of scampering around, doing all my own research, conducting all my own interviews, setting it all up. And it was like 3,000 words by the end. So very, very cool, very fun. And I couldn't have done it without my like very enthusiastic editor. So all that said, I'll get into some of my main takeaways that will hopefully be helpful to anyone who wants to go in journalism. My first is before even applying to an internship, you want to make sure that you have a really wide-ranging portfolio of published work. Um, Published is important just because, it shows that you have some sort of, presence. And I think that a lot of internships usually ask for like 2 to 7 clips. So make sure that you're building those before an internship. And also make sure that they cover a variety of topics because it'll show how flexible of a writer you can be and how you can kind of fit in where they need you. And related to that, I think you should never turn down an opportunity to write, even if you are not interested in the subject or you have no expertise in it. Like those kinds of assignments, they can really surprise you, and also they'll open a lot of doors for you in the long run. So just don't say no unless it's like really uncomfortable or something, but like just keep saying yes. My third piece of advice is to spend some time with the other interns and coworkers in person if that is possible. I know that like post-COVID, newsrooms and offices are a little bit of a luxury, and a lot of journalists also work from home. But if it is a possibility, definitely go in person and like be around the other people who are doing this work because it'll really, really build those professional relationships. And it's just more fun that way. You'll get a lot more out of the internship. And finally, I think that you should ask a million questions while you're an intern because this is the time to be a little clueless. I think obviously you need a foundation going in so like they trust you. But if you're unsure about things, the best way to build confidence is just by asking questions, even if they feel dumb or whatever. Like it'll make the experience so much better. But yeah, all in all, the internship played out exactly as I'd hoped. And thanks to all of the mentors and the people who I got to meet over the summer, I know for sure that I want to go into journalism after I graduate. Coming this summer, I'm actually very happy to say that I will be doing a post-grad internship, but this time at the Seattle Times. And that definitely would not have happened had it not been for all of the experiences leading up to this. So I'm incredibly grateful. And before I end, I just want to thank my editor, Abby, at the UT for just her incredible kindness and for her never-ending encouragement. Also, the internship coordinator, Michael Price, the senior editor, Laura, and then my people at Smith who helped pave the way for me to even get there in the first place, like my professors, Nyla and Dusty. And thank you to Debra for helping me put together this presentation. Sorry it started a little late.
Wonderful. Thank you, Olivia. Wonderful job. Okay, so we're going to move right on, and our next presenter is Madeline.
All right. I'm gonna pull up my slideshow. Hopefully you'll see it. Can everyone see my presentation? Yep. All right. So,
Great.
great. Well, thank you everyone for taking the time this afternoon to be here. And thank you for the opportunity to present my summer internship from last summer. I worked at Pragda, a film distribution company that focused on Spanish language and Latin American films. And I entitled this presentation A Summer Made Possible by Praxis because it really was a summer made possible by Praxis. And I'll talk a little bit about in my presentation about why that is. But yeah, I'll just go straight into it. So my name is Madeline. I use she, her pronouns. I am a junior at Smith College, studying film and media studies, Spanish, and I also have a concentration in translation studies. I studied abroad in Cordoba, Spain, my sophomore fall semester. I have dedicated a lot of my studies to Spanish language as a result of my heritage, coming from a Latina household. And I'm really passionate about translation studies, and I intend on going into the film industry. So kind of a mishmash of things there, but you'll see how those all connect in my presentation. I'm currently participating in a domestic exchange program at Wellesley College, um, studying multimedia production here and at MIT. And so I'll get into it. So as a translation studies concentrator, I really wanted last summer to find an internship that would combine my interests in language with film, inspired by a course I took while abroad that focused on Spanish audiovisual translation and film, which was really, really cool. And I really wanted to find an internship that would combine my interests in Spanish and in film that had to do with translation studies in some way, but that also felt personally fulfilling for me. I really like to do work that relates to cross-cultural representation and conversations, and I really would like to work in Latino representation in media. And so going into the summer, I had a really niche idea of what I wanted to do for my internship, and I had no idea if that opportunity even existed. So I looked towards my resources at Smith, including the Lazarus Center. Actually, I had meetings with both Debra and Emily in preparation for this internship. And I also looked towards my FMS department for resources and Spanish department. And the semester was going by quickly. I was getting very nervous about not having an internship. I also like manic applied to many, many internships with little response. So I really thought the summer was going to slip by until my Spanish professor and advisor, Molly, actually put me in contact with Pragda. So Pragda, as I said, what is a Latin American and Spanish language film distribution company. They work with um, a large variety of films from Latin America, including Brazil, and also Portugal and Spain, and getting these films into colleges and universities, and so that for educational purposes, so that they have access to these films, which is, as you can imagine, completely up my alley. And so I was very excited for this opportunity. Thankfully, I got an interview, and I guess that interview went well because I ended up working there. And I was so excited because they work with exactly what I was looking for, which I really wouldn't have no idea existed if not had my professor got me into contact with them. So Pragda has a streaming service that colleges and universities use for educational purposes, but they also have this opportunity called Spanish Film Clubs, which is really cool because they allow colleges and universities to choose five of their films that they have acquired the rights to screen the films on campus and then facilitate a conversation about the themes and whatnot that come up afterwards, and even have opportunities to chat with the directors and to create for students to write reviews of the films. And so I thought that was all super, super interesting. And my specific work related to a large variety of things as an intern with for a small team. I found myself doing lots of different work, including creating these discussion guides, which you'll see on the left. Those were meant to facilitate the conversations that would occur between groups of students and professors after the screenings. I also worked on their social media page. I was trained on how to use Pragda's branding to create social media posts that looked very distinctly in the Pragda style. I also helped upkeep their website using WordPress. Pragda has acquired the rights to over 700 films, and each of those films had its own web page. Each had access to Vimeo on demand, so people can stream the films regardless of their affiliation with Pragda online. And so that was a lot of upkeep work, and I got my hands into WordPress metaphorically. And I also created promotional videos. I conducted marketing campaigns for them for their Hispanic Heritage Month campaign and Indigenous Studies campaign. And I also worked completely in Spanish, attending these meetings bi-weekly and weekly. It was a little bit of a challenge, which I'll get into. But regardless, they were super cool because we had a long list of films that we had to watch in preparation for these meetings, and we would discuss whether we think we should acquire the rights to the films and for what programs the film would suit best for. So I mentioned Spanish. I do have a very high level of Spanish, which I totally attest to all of the immersive experiences that Smith has given me the opportunity to take advantage of, including my study abroad experience, and the incredible course load that I've taken within the Spanish department. But it's different when you are working in your second language for the first time via Zoom, I may add. And so it was less of a, oh, I don't know how to say this, as more of a, oh, I need the confidence to say this. And that's not something that came easy to me at the beginning of the internship. But I really do think that the Spanish and Portuguese department at Smith really prepared me well for this experience, and I'm really proud of the fact that I was able to get through an entire summer working in Spanish. Um, and so over time, I was able to do well, regardless of my fears of messing up or saying something slightly wrong. And I am very excited that I left a lasting legacy on Pragda, despite any challenges I may have had. I had the idea to start this Students Critics Corner page on their website, that I mentioned earlier. And I was the first person to write a review of one of their films. And since I ended the internship, they continue to grow this page on their website and actually have additional reviews that they have posted on their website so far, which is a really cool opportunity for students. And I'm really proud that I left this lasting legacy on their organization, even though I have moved on since then. So, one of my main takeaways about this experience with Pragda is that I definitely do want to work in the film industry, but I have more confidence saying that to people. I think that a lot of people, when they hear that I'm interested in going into this industry, they think like, oh, you have unrealistic dreams. This industry is so cutthroat. It's so competitive. I don't know how you're going to make it, which obviously is exaggerated, but people have this image in their heads of that's how the industry is. Um, However, I really think like there's so many opportunities in film that we don't necessarily think of immediately. I would have never thought about the importance of film distribution within the industry, but really that's how something like Latino representation in film actually, comes to play. And I actually had an impact on that, which is really cool to say. And I feel like because of this internship that I had, I'm just more interested in seeing how this goal of mine can become a reality. And because of that, I've been more interested in taking a wider range of courses at Smith relating to film and seeking a lot of more opportunities to engage with the industry in different ways. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Praxis. This this internship was remote and unpaid, and so normally I would have probably looked past it because of my personal criteria that about applying to internships. It's important for me to go in person into a job and to be paid, and I'm really glad that Praxis opened the door for me to be able to actually land an internship that was a perfect experience for me in that time. It was exactly what I was looking for. And because of Praxis, really, um, I was able to actually fulfill that goal of mine. And so I really, really recommend to students to take advantage of Praxis, especially if you're have a concentration and have the opportunity to use Praxis Plus. I didn't have to worry that I was using my one Praxis on this concentration because I have another opportunity to fulfill another Praxis in the future should I need the opportunity. And so I really am fortunate that I had the opportunity to be funded by Smith to pursue this. And I would say my main takeaway is that there were lots of parts of this internship that could have been uncomfortable for me. But I think that you have to be able to make the uncomfortable comfortable, and to put yourself out there and make decisions and take advantage of opportunities when they come their way, and that Smith will support you through that. Um, and so, yeah, that's my experience at Pragda last summer. Thank you all for listening.
Okay. Thank you, Madeline. That was fantastic. And congrats on a great internship experience. And now we have Katherine, aka Kate Metzger, who's going to do our final presentation today.
Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. Just before I get started, making sure everyone can see my screen, you can hear me, nothing's crashing and burning. All right, perfect. I am Katherine Metzger, class of 2026, so a senior here at Smith College, and this past summer, I interned at Stanley Black Decker, based in Baltimore, Maryland. It is the world's largest power tools company, and I will get into that later because I had a very specific reason for interning here. I was a marketing intern, and I will address, I think, something that many of you who are already Smithies are wondering about this presentation. We don't have a business school, so how does somebody get into a marketing internship coming from a liberal arts college? Like I said, I'm a senior. I came into Smith as a studio art and linguistics perspective major. Very, very different things happen. Now I'm majoring in quantitative economics and Portuguese Brazilian studies. I'm involved here on campus in the Conway Center for Entrepreneurship, which has been very helpful going into marketing and learning how to build a product up from scratch. I'm involved in Smithies in Business, which is a really, really well-resourced club for any of you looking to go into marketing. But like I said, we are not a business school, so I really had to look outside the scope of just Smith when I was trying to build up my skills for marketing. Two places that were really, really useful for me in this were actually right next door at UMass through the Five College Consortium. So the UMass Entrepreneurship Club and the Eisenberg Marketing Club were instrumental. They helped me to do mock interviews, they helped me to meet people who were taking business classes, and as much as Smith helped me, I think leveraging the Five College curriculum really helped me as well. So, Stanley Black Decker, like I said, it is the world's largest power tool company. This appealed to me because I come from a family that has a lot of tradespeople in it. One of my cousins is a locksmith, and she is the only woman in the entire company at the job that she works at. Women make up only 3% of tradespeople, and so it was important in me. It's something that I have always grown up around, and something that I wanted to give back to and help to increase that percentage. So Stanley Black and Decker is present in literally every continent. I mean, you need power tools in Antarctica, so literally every continent. They have about 50,000 employees. This global presence was really important to me. I originally grew up outside the United States and knew that I wanted to continue to make a global impact in the future. Stanley Black Decker is a part of the consumer packaged goods world. So if you think about the food that you're buying on the shelf, that's a packaged good. A toy that you're buying is a packaged good, and of course, power tools. One very specific thing, besides what they make, that drew me to Stanley Black Decker is that it's a part of the Fortune 500. This is a word, if you're at Smith, again, you've probably heard this thrown around a lot too. It's just one of the largest companies in the United States. They did about $14 billion in revenue last year, and these companies in the Fortune 500 tend to have very, very planned out pipelines to bring people from their internship program directly into full-time hires. So working at the Fortune 500 as an intern, you are very likely, sometimes up to 50% of people will receive a return offer to come on full-time. This was important to me. I wanted that security. As well, these larger companies tend to just have more structured intern pipelines. For example, I was one of maybe 80 or 90 different interns in this program, and they offered us structured networking and mentorship and support throughout the entire process. At a smaller company, I felt that unfortunately there just wouldn't be as much resources and time that they could dedicate to those sorts of opportunities, and that's what drew me to a large company like Stanley Black Decker. But my journey did not start just with my summer internship last year. I arrived at Smith with a lot of imposter syndrome, like I think pretty much everybody at the school does. I was in some of my classes in my first year, and people next to me, they'd be doom scrolling LinkedIn because apparently we do that at Smith, and they would have 500 connections. I got LinkedIn the week before I got here. I looked around. I was coming from a high school where there were no AP classes offered, no international baccalaureate, nothing like that. Everyone around me, it felt like, although we all know this isn't true, it felt like everyone was getting straight A's. I just thought I wasn't good enough. I got rejected from clubs at Smith my first and second year. I got rejected from Google on my birthday. And one of the internships I did do didn't even pay me the full amount they said they would. So it was truly a really, really long journey to get here. Your first internship will not be your best internship, and no internship is your forever internship because that's not what an internship is. And so it really is a long process. Ultimately, through the work that I put in, I was invited to stay on at Stanley Black Decker during this past academic year for a co-op. I'm starting a 3-year rotational marketing program post-grad at a Fortune 100 company, so I already know what I'm doing after I graduate. Very lucky to know that. And everything that I learned at Stanley Black Decker, I've been able to apply to my own ventures, one of which is now profitable. So, while I was here at Smith, there's a lot that I took advantage of to get to this point. First off, the open curriculum was instrumental to me. I did a lot of credits my first 2 years, usually 20, 22 credits, because I knew if I front-loaded credits then, I could really dedicate these last 2 years to doing academic year internships. And you'll see on my next slide, I did an internship fall and spring semester of essentially every part of these last 2 years. I chose to major in quantitative economics because I knew that marketing is a very creative field, but in order to really succeed in marketing, you have to be able to dig deep into what actually are the results of the marketing campaign you're working on. Coming up with ideas is a lot of it, but being the person who's willing to say, look, I know how to look at the numbers, something that people just generally don't want to do, really makes you stand out. To work at a global company, I prepared myself by going to the language tables, the Portuguese and Spanish tables. I would be there almost every week my first couple of years. The Portuguese major was a really big leap for me and something that I feel really helped me at this company. They would put me on calls with the Brazilian team specifically because I could speak Portuguese and that helped me stand out. And finally, like I said, the Conway Center. I took their J-term entrepreneurship classes, and if you're the kind of person who either wants to market a product or build a product, or even market, for example, yourself as an artist, the entrepreneurship class is so helpful for learning how to do this. And finally, again, to work at a global company to make myself stand out by saying, hey, I can communicate with so much more of the company than most of your employees can. I took a lot of languages while I was here. This slide is going to look like a lot to you. It looks like a lot to me, so I'm going to break it down. This is everything I did to get to my internship. This is what I feel like is the most important. I'm not going to say you have to do all of this. I'm also not going to say you don't have to because I just don't know how competitive it is, but this is what worked for me. For starters, I always was freelancing. I started doing digital art commissions, which is sort of adjacent to marketing, in 2016 and just sort of evolved my client base through that, working towards more traditional marketing. I worked with a local startup, which is called Note House, from October to December of 2024 while I was applying to my internships, and that's local to the Northampton area, so I really leveraged my local community. I interned with the Praxis, or utilizing the Praxis Fund, with another local startup that was in my hometown. And utilizing the Praxis Fund, I really wouldn't have been able to do it without that. And finally, I took on a leadership role on campus as the head of social media for Gold Key Tour Guiding. And in this, I ended up managing a team of about like 15 different students. Being able to manage a team like that when you're coming in, even as an intern, already having experience like that, really shows that you could be valuable in a managerial role later on. So I think that helped me stand out as well. As for recruiting, one of the things I love about the marketing industry is really they're recruiting all year. So some of the larger, like big tech, for example, they'll put out their marketing internships as early as July of the year before you begin. But then, one of my internships, I got it May, the month before it started. So really all throughout the academic year, you have these opportunities to be applying to marketing internships. For me, I started applying in around September of the academic year before the internship. I got my offer letter about 2 weeks after I applied, so it was a very streamlined process. I applied online to Stanley Black Decker through their job application website. They sent me a form asking additional questions, the so on, like, why do you want to work at this company? They must have liked my answers because then I went to a phone screen with a recruiter from the company. And then I interviewed with someone who was a member of the team I would actually be working with. Right after that, I was sent my offer letter. Again, really streamlined, very transparent process. Once I was at Stanley Black Decker, it was an internship of 10 weeks over the summer. I'm going to give an example of one of the projects I worked on, but really there were a lot. They had me juggle a lot of different responsibilities. I ended up completing about 15 projects. Of these, 5 were projects where they took me at the start of the internship and said, we want you to get these 5 projects done. The other 10, some of them came from I finished those first 5 projects and they said, hey, your work on this was really good, but it led us to this new question and we want you to tackle this question as well. The last type of project I had was ones where I pitched it myself to the leadership. And this, for example, right here, this TikTok Shop pilot research. So I realized pretty early on that a lot of the competitors for the brand were active on TikTok Shop, but Stanley Black Decker, the company, none of the brands were on TikTok Shop. And I identified, why is this important? Well, we are missing out on about $60 million a year in potential sales for the brands because we're not operating on TikTok Shop. With that number, $60 million, I was able to convince leadership that this was something that they should have me look more into, and this led to them assigning me to research how and when we could launch on TikTok Shop. How I put this on my resume, I emphasized that number, 60 million, to really stop the eyes of whoever's scrolling my resume. I emphasized that I did this all with a 3-day turnaround. That's important to show that I can work under pressure. And finally, what was the outcome of this? Supporting the launch of Black & Decker brand on TikTok Shop. When you're an intern, you're not always going to know the final results, the exact numbers. So you're going to have to put something a little more vague, like supported the launch strategy, and that's okay, that's expected from an internship. My key takeaways from this whole process. First, I look for all my jobs on LinkedIn because it's the largest job board. It's not entirely vetted, so use discretion like you would anywhere else, but then I don't apply on LinkedIn. I apply on the company website, it demonstrates more interest, and sometimes it'll put your application actually in sort of a different pile of people who applied through the company website instead of the larger amount of people who applied on LinkedIn. By the time you get to an interview with a company, you really need to do your research. One of the things I think made me stand out with Stanley Black Decker is that I literally mentioned a marketing case study from 1996, and they all really, really enjoyed that I had that depth of knowledge. It made me stand out against other applicants. And finally, something that a lot of people don't remember, it's to send thank you emails to your interviewers. When you're sending a thank you email, don't just say, hey, thanks for talking with me. If you had something in the interview that you two really connected on, make yourself memorable. Bring that up again. Overall, this was really an incredible internship for me. It led me to what I think is probably going to be my full career from now on of marketing. And I really couldn't have done it without the support from Smith College, from Debra Immergut, my entire departments at Quantitative Economics and Portuguese, from the UMass Entrepreneurship Club, Eisenberg Marketing Club, from my parents, from my partner and his family who let me stay at their house in Baltimore so that I didn't go broke while I was doing this internship. It took a lot of work to get here. It took a village to help me get here. And that's how I got to the outcome of landing a Fortune 500 internship. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Okay, wonderful job there too, and congrats on your post-grad job. Amazing. So now we have some time for questions, and I would love to share any questions from audience members. So please feel free to put those in the chat. And while you're thinking about that, I see Emily has sent a great question here, which is it's easy to have expectations for an internship before you start, but what surprised you about your internship? So, Olivia, you want to start us off? Can you think of anything that when you got there, you were like, oh, I did not see this coming?
Um, well, this is like a weird one, but at at the paper that I was at, they did not use like Google Docs or Word to write any of the articles. So the biggest adjustment for me was basically having to learn an entirely new interface. We wrote everything in WordPress, which if any of you have ever worked within the like very, very back door like WordPress, like it can get really sticky. So that was really interesting, but it has all these like SEO tools that, you learn how to use and it's just a way for them to like they have a whole different like editing culture and everything. So that was just kind of surprising because I was so used to just like writing something up and then like I don't know, submitting it to whatever website or like the website stuff comes later, but like we were writing articles and if we hit the wrong button, it would just go live on the website. So we had to be like really, really careful. Um, but yeah, that was a weird little surprising thing, but every paper does it differently as far as I know.
Hey, Madeline or Kate, do you have anything that surprised you?
Yeah, I'll say that I went into this internship not knowing anything about film distribution, but knowing that film was in the name of it, and so being excited about that because I want to work in film. And so I tried to go into the internship with no assumptions of what film distribution looks like, because I feel like the average person doesn't really notice film distribution. It just is sort of like in the void, like, oh, there was a film made and now I can see it. But you don't see that middleman working on that. So it wasn't as much of a surprise, but a new experience for me. I really had no experience in that whatsoever. And I can now appreciate the companies out there working to get these films into our TV screens and into our phones and theaters, which is pretty cool.
Something I'd say that really surprised me is I am not a numbers person at all. I came in, like I said, as a prospective studio art and linguistics major, and the asset that it is to be a creative person who has taken just maybe even one statistics class makes you stand out so, so much when you're looking at a role where you need to be creative. But again, you can be that person who can say, look, I know none of us necessarily like the numbers, but I can do them. I think that that was really important for me.
Okay, thank you. So here at the Lazarus Center, we are very aware that all of the industries that we're working with students on to, get them internships and jobs are changing all the time and now at a speed that is, kind of astounding. So I'm really curious to know what you saw about, change in your area, if you heard your supervisors and the people on your team talking about change that was coming, anything that stood out to you there and might be good for us to know who haven't had the benefit of being in these workplaces. Um, Madeline, you're nodding, so I will call on you.
Sure. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind with me is everyone is afraid of how AI is going to change every industry, especially the film industry. But something that came up within my internship
was actually using AI in a very specific way to leverage film distribution, which was working in the WordPress, as Olivia mentioned, to increase like the SEO options of like how early on the page does the website appear for someone when they search certain tools. And so they actually had me trained on using the AI features within WordPress to increase those opportunities, which in film distribution, funny enough, is actually a positive impact. And so it's a lot more complex than we think when we say like, oh, AI is really hurting these industries. I think right now for film, we're in a weird stage of, oh, this has the potential to impact certain parts of the industry, but also has the opportunity to grow other parts of the same industry. And so that was something that I had worked on this summer that was like a newer sort of practice that they were incorporating into their positions.
Okay, interesting. And notes of optimism, which are very welcome. How about Olivia or Kate?
I 100% have things to say on the whole AI bit, and I can also talk about just other general changes because journalism is it's constantly changing, and a lot of people think of it as like a pretty archaic practice at this point, especially like I was doing print journalism, which, people call it a dying industry. I don't think it's a dying industry by any stretch. But we would have these like I don't know, group like staff meetings, and they would show us the numbers of like subscriptions and everything because this was a corporate newsroom. So their business model is based off of how many subscriptions to literally the physical paper they would get. And those numbers were not like they have been on a pretty consistent like downward slope, but the digital subscriptions were always going up, like every meeting that we had. So just a big shift to digital is like a really, really big thing happening in the journalism world. There's also the like constant struggle of like paywalls and things like that, and also multimedia journalism. Like I actually didn't have a subscription to the UT because it's a little expensive, and so I just got all of their headlines through Instagram. And while I was there, they hired a like full-time social media person for the first time. So just a big transition to that. And as for AI, I have a interesting perspective on that, I think, because the company was in an active, it might still be active, lawsuit against OpenAI for using their material in the like in searches and stuff and the way that they kind of like appropriate people's work and kind of regurgitate it without credit. Um, but at the same time, there were also journalists who were experimenting with it, which I was like always very, very cautious about because it can get so much stuff wrong. But I knew some reporters who would use it to like write headlines or yeah, do like SEO things that are just like really mundane. All of the people who work there have a million hats and they have so much to do. And I don't know. It's a tricky thing because it's like why would you use it if we're in a lawsuit against it? But also if you have to cut corners, you would hope that they would be harmless ones, but that's maybe a bigger conversation. So I think that completely AI generated articles are a total farce and should not be the direction that we're headed in, but like yeah, I don't know. There's a lot to think about there.
Definitely. Kate, how about you?
I'm also gonna say the AI word because it's the time that we're living in. Everyone's gonna talk about it. I'm gonna say something that isn't gonna sound reassuring at first, but I promise it is. A lot of my job was to look at what competitors were doing and compare their performance against what the company was doing. And there were a lot of competitors who, in their marketing material, were sometimes posting things that were purely made with AI. And in the stats, it showed that those companies, that's not doing well. It's not helping them generate sales. It's not getting any of the vanity metrics like likes, or it's not getting impressions. The content that was really performing and converting people to actually buy the product that people have made, that the company is selling, that so many people have worked on, is the content where there's actually a human touch in it. So yes, there's a lot of AI generated content out there, and no, at the moment it is absolutely not effective. Not at least in the industry I was working in.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just want to say, as the person at the Lazarus Center specializing in advising students considering careers like journalism and film and marketing, um, I see lots of reason for optimism, and I'm always talking about that on campus. So even though these are areas that have tough questions, that's pretty much true of all all workplaces at the moment. So I'm glad you are bringing some good reports back from the workplaces. Um, we have one, I think, nice little question to round us out tonight, and that is what kind of final advice would you give to students who are listening here about finding or landing internships or making the most of them? And let's start off with Kate this time.
So when I was 11, I was a Minecraft YouTuber, and I put that on my resume when I was applying to this internship. I almost didn't apply to this internship because it was a company that I thought was too big. You can just do things in life. You don't need to lock yourself out of an opportunity because you think, I'm not the person that I see getting this opportunity. You might have a passion project that you started when you were 12 years old, and that might just be the reason that when you're in those interviews, they say that they picked your resume out of the pile. So nothing is ever, if you love doing it, it's never a waste of your time. There's always a way that you can show really who you are to if you're trying to impress someone in an interview, really showing yourself and what you've put your work into, no matter if it's something that might seem as trivial to them as a Minecraft YouTube channel. Absolutely, just do what you love and never think that you're not that person. Never think that you're not good enough to throw your hat into the ring.
Okay. Madeline, Olivia.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I would say that Smith has so many resources that I think are being underappreciated at times by students. And I would just say, like, why not just take advantage of all of them in any way that you can? It's the reason why I got that internship. It's the reason why I was able to do both an international and domestic exchange program. And with the new international experience grant and the new Lazarus Center stipend, like I think that there's so much to take advantage of. And what a waste opportunity it would be to go through Smith, your 4 years at Smith, and not take the two Praxis if you have the access to Praxis Plus. There's so much at Smith. You just have to do some digging in the website sometimes. It takes talking to lots of people to tell you about new opportunities that you didn't know about. But there's so much there. And I would absolutely say take advantage of every single one.
Great advice. Olivia?
Yeah, I'm seconding that because when you offer like Praxis is basically free money and you're offering companies like unpaid labor, but you're getting paid for it. So like it's a really great opportunity. I also think that a big like thing for me is just being organized and like deliberate about applying to internships. Like I had a running spreadsheet basically of like all the places that I wanted to try and like literally it was just me Googling like biggest paper in Miami, biggest paper in like Seattle, whatever. And then kind of like doing my due diligence to like figure out which ones actually had internship programs and then what all the materials were and when, because there are many, many application deadlines that are early in the year and they will totally like fly by you. There were 6 internships that I applied to this year that were all on Halloween, so that was really, really rough. But just like do your research ahead of time and then it'll like you won't have to stress about missing things later, because that was a big regret of mine, is like seeing something that I would have been like such a good candidate for, but I just totally missed the deadline. So do your research early, make a spreadsheet, and like pop all the links and all the resources and all your materials in there, and then you're good to go. And take full advantage of all the like cover letter writing workshops and the Lazarus Center and the Jacobson Center and everything. Like, yeah, use it all.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing your insights and your wisdom and your amazing presentations about your experiences. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This has been wonderful. And I'm so glad that you could join us tonight, and have a good evening.